How did 9/11 change the world? On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 Al Qaeda members hijacked commercial planes. Two planes targeted the World Trade Center, a third hit the Pentagon, and the last crashed into a field in rural Pennsylvania. Flight 93 fought back and took over the plane after the terrorists hijacked it. The plane was thought to be going toward the White House, but instead, the passengers flew it into a field in rural Pennsylvania.
This was a sudden shock to Americans and people all over the world. The 9/11 attacks claimed more than 3,000 U.S. civilians. There were extremely disturbing phone calls to 911 for emergencies or even someone in the plane calling their family members to simply say goodbye. U.S. President George W. Bush gave a speech to our nation. He said, "These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat, but they have failed. Our country is strong."
This showed that even though the US was in anguish and mourning, they will still stand strong and not back down. The United States response to the 9/11 attack was quick and for a purpose. On September 20, 2001, President George W. Bush declared war on terror and stated that the world's main fight was to defeat terrorism. This was the start of one of the main turning points in history because of the focus on destroying Al Qaeda and Taliban was highly increased.
Al Qaeda was now one of the main targets of the United Nations. Nearly 1 month after the attacks, American, British, and Afghan United Front soldiers were deployed in Afghanistan to destroy Al Qaeda and the Taliban regime. In 2001, the Taliban regime fell. Following the falling of the Taliban regime, there was an international conference held to create a new transitional Afghanistan government. This is another example of a turning point in history because of the fall of the Taliban. Afghanistan government was reformed.
After the 9/11 attacks, Muslims and Arabs were affected in and out of the U.S. In the Chicago metropolitan area, post 9/11, there were civil rights issues involving these groups after the attacks on September 11th. A widely read paper in France called Le Monde ran the headline, Nos somos tous Americans, which translates to, We are all Americans. This was hard for people in the U.S. that had the same religious or physical characteristics of those who partook in the attacks. An Illinois advisory committee to the U.S. Commission of Civil Rights ran a report on how these groups were being treated post 9/11. They gathered that even before the 9/11 attacks, these groups were being misunderstood and stereotyped. After the attacks happened, some of those misconceptions were revealed. They would be accused of being terrorists because of their appearances or religious backgrounds. This shows that because of the attacks, they were affected with hate crime even when they did nothing to cause 9/11.
While the US forces were in Afghanistan and other Middle Eastern countries, there were Muslim and Arabs being affected, just like the one in the US. The civilians in Afghanistan are in danger because of the war going on. There have been over 70,000 civilian casualties because of the war. These are mainly because of the airstrike, which caused some main part in the civilian casualties. These airstrikes were because of the United States military relaxed the rules for airstrike attack in 2017, which caused most of the civilian death. This is a turning point in history because of how Muslim and Arab and people in the Middle East were treated and how they lived after the 9/11 attack.
United States civilians were also very affected by the September 11th. Some were affected physically by the attacks with injuries or even death. There were over 3,000 people that died because of the 9/11 attacks. Some people on the planes or even in the buildings that got hit were fortunate enough to have time to say goodbye to their families and or friends before never being able to talk to them again. This is a phone recording from one of the civilians.
It's us, sweetie. Okay, well, I just wanted to tell you I love you. We're having a little problem on the plane. I'm totally fine. I just love you more than anything. Just know that. And I'm I'm comfortable and I'm okay for now. Just a little problem, so I'll I just love you. Please tell my family I love them too.
These phone recordings are extremely disturbing and sad because it shows how scary the attacks were and how sudden they happened. Another way the U.S. civilians were affected was mentally. There were lots of families that lost their own family members because of this tragedy. Their own family was taken from them without explanation and reason. There were some people that were interviewed and gave oral testimonies on how 9/11 affected them and their families.
Another perspective of the attack is a first responder of the attack on Pentagon, Robert Gray, a battalion chief at the Arlington County Fire Department, was one of the first responders at the scene of the incident at the Pentagon on September 11. When Gray arrived at the scene of crash, he said, "This just feels so evil, you know, that somebody has done this and they did it with a load plane. It was like, you gotta be kidding me." He explained what he had to do when he arrived at the scene. Like, look for the survivor, but he said that on the first floor, there was obviously no survivor. But it was weird because on the second floor, there was some room that are demolished, and then there are some room that are pristine and clean. This all showed that when he showed up, he knew how evil and wrong it was.
The most raw perspective from the 9/11 attacks is from the survivors. Deanne DeFontis was on the 89th floor of the World Trade Center on September 11th. She said, "And I remember what an absolutely beautiful day it was. The sky was this beautiful blue. There were very few clouds when I got in my office. I took one last look out the window and then went to my desk. After that last look, disaster struck." DeFontis explains what happened in the moment. Then all of a sudden, this bang happened. The bang and being thrown out of my chair and having the door partially opened, it like all happened at the same time. And not only that, but the conference room was on my left. The ceiling fell down and hit the table and cracked the conference room table. So all this noise happened at once. She did not know what was going on, so she called one of her closest friends to ask her to turn on the TV and see what was going on. Her friend confirmed that it was an airplane that hit the building. She said, "All I remember is that yellow helmet, a flashlight, and him standing at the front of the door saying, 'We have to go now.' It was Pablo Ortiz." A few other people were on their way to the exit when the first tower collapsed. She said, "The lights flickered, this tremendous roar, and the stairways shook. And we were holding onto the banister, and the building is shaking, and no one said a word." As they made out of the building, she looked at the window at a store, and she said she does not even recognize herself. This really shows how scary and fast-paced it was in the World Trade Center when they got hit by the planes.
Another turning point in history because of 9/11 was how airport security is taken and proceeded now. Before 9/11, you used to be able to show up minutes before a flight, just a simple metal detector, and had to show no ID. At the time, airport security was carried out by private contractors and was usually the lowest bidder before 9/11. Security was almost invisible, and it was really designed to be that way. Now, because of 9/11, security checkpoint lines can take up to an hour. You now have to take off your shoes, empty your pockets, and take out devices you have on you. There is full body scanners and 3D X-ray scanners that your bags go through. All of those extra security measures to make sure that nothing goes wrong and everything is safe, so nothing like 9/11 happens again.
Overall, 9/11 has impacted the world in many ways. It has changed who the United Nations has targeted in past years. It has affected different groups of people and how they have been treated. It has affected your civilian and family all over the world. Lastly, it has changed how airport security works today and for the future.